Welcome to the Iferia TechCast. Here we bring you all things science, engineering, technology, and innovation. I'm your host, Ezekiel Iferia, and today we are joined by John Younger, a member of the talent acquisition team at JobElephant, a leading recruitment advertising technology company, a Notre Dame graduate in mathematics and computer science. John has founded 6 successful companies, holds multiple patents, and pioneered AI-driven hiring solutions that make talent acquisitions faster, smarter, and more human-centered. So, John, I am honored and excited to welcome you to the show. Thank you very much for taking the time. Yeah, I really appreciate it, and I do not take it lightly. So, it's an honor to have you here. Let's dive into the conversation, John. You spent years helping organizations find the right talent. So what's the biggest mistake, or some of the mistakes companies make, when they try to hire?
Well, I think there are many. And one of them relates right back to your area around finite element analysis. And it's interesting because it's about finite application analysis. And one of the biggest mistakes I see companies make is they start with this idea of perfection and describe a role that no human can possibly fill. That's the single biggest mistake right out of the gate. 10 years of experience, this much salary, must start Monday, must have these 10 skills, must be a culture fit. And these multiple elements don't live well together, and they certainly don't live naturally in a single person. It's much more effective when the recruiter or the person responsible for filling the role asks just 5 questions, and usually these 5 questions are never asked. What actually needs to get done by when? Rather than come up with a laundry list of all these skills, what is the pain to be solved? Why is the job open? Another thing will be, how will this person's success be quantitatively measured in the first year to know you have a top performer? And this quickly allows the team, the hiring team and the HR team, to shed this idea that I have these 10 must-have requirements, and now I can get more meaningful data about what the pain is to be solved and how the measurement of solving it will actually be achieved. And the few others are, why would the right person want this job? Again, this is hard to mathematically construct, but is essential to be able to communicate and engage the right people. Having a job isn't good enough. I need to be able to convince you, or at least entice you to be interested in the job, right? And the last one is, what kind of people don't work out here? And this can oftentimes be the most illuminating, because when you understand what kind of people may not fit, or that had the right technical talent but didn't have the right motivation or communication skills or personality style, that can also become incredibly powerful, feeding into this engine, especially when you start seeing the introduction of artificial intelligence. It makes this very complex problem more manageable.
Okay, John, that was a very insightful response. So, sometimes when we want to apply for job and we check the requirements, we see these loads of requirements for the job: 10 years of experience, I have to have certain skills that are clearly outlined, and we just automatically write ourselves off as not qualified enough for this job. You say that these multiple requirements, like you said, don't live naturally in a single person. So how can companies, who wants to hire better, how can they, list these job postings in such a way that the right people read them and they feel motivated to apply?
So let's take one of those elements you mentioned, 10 years of experience. I still have no idea what that means, because you might have 1 year of experience 10 times, or you might have 10 years of progressive experience. I don't know. And I want the person with 10 years of progressive experience. So rather than list years of experience, perhaps highlight a question that only someone with the requisite experience will actually know the answer to. Again, this is where AI can be a very powerful tool. One of the things we built at JobElephant is this algorithm that actually comes up with more meaningful, measurable questions. So I'm going to go back to finite element analysis again. So how do you know somebody's any good at it? I've got 10 years of experience. But maybe a better question is, rather than how many years of experience is, how many times have you solved an FMA equation or problem like this? And now I know if you've never solved a problem like that, maybe it has to do with rotation, maybe it has to do with certain materials over a certain time, maybe it has to do with a SpaceX rocket, I don't know. But if I know you've solved a problem that's very similar to the pain that we have and the problem we're solving, I know you're a better fit, independent of how many years of experience you might have.
John, you sure have done your research, and I'm pretty impressed about how much you know about finite element analysis. So, you say that instead of listing something like a requirement like 10 years of experience, they can ask a question that only someone with required experience they want to outline will be able to answer. Say, for example, they put a question like that, and me with just 1 year of experience, I take that question to AI. Nowadays, information is easily accessible. I take that question to an AI tool and it breaks it down for me. And I am able to articulate an answer that would be similar to one someone that had a 10-year experience in that field would give. So how, does that not create like a cheat code for people that don't even have up to the required experience or the required, the minimum requirements for that job to get the roles, while those who are actually qualified struggle to get it?
Great question. And I'm going to rephrase it. Basically, people are going to cheat the questions.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to use AI to come up with answers that they think the hiring team wants to hear, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's the question.
What we found supporting thousands of jobs is that in very few cases do people lie about that kind of experience technically. And the reason is quite simple. If you say you use AI to solve, answer a question and say, yeah, I've solved one of this complexity. And the first time I interview with you and I ask you, give me the detail of the specific problem you solved and where. There's nothing for you to go with. And people will understand that if they lie about how they've solved something, it will take exactly one question to derail their candidacy. So very few people will push that kind of question, whereas many candidates will say, I have 10 years of experience because they've been in the field 10 years. So therefore, I have 10 years of experience. Again, not the same thing.
John, there's this thing I have seen on some videos on Instagram Reels, where some people doing job interviews, they put a device on, close by, just maybe stick it to their screen and, it's not visible to the camera. Or sometimes even with the device, maybe they are using a laptop for the interview, and there are certain softwares that can allow you to even share your screen and explain to the person, but then an AI will be at the background that will not be visible in the screen recording, which you can actually communicate with, while you are doing the interview, and it will give you the response, the right response to the interview questions asked by the interviewer. How about someone who used AI to answer the question that, was given prior to the interview, got an interview scheduled, and actually used AI to go through the interview? Is that not a possibility?
Well, what's interesting? Do you know the root of that technology? And do you know how much further you can go with it? Are you aware of that?
No, I haven't tried it myself before.
But the root of it is customer service. And so the customer service technology with AI will actually give the customer service person real-time feedback about the stress level of the person they're talking to, the frustration level, the words they use, how they communicate, and it allows the customer service person to change the way they're talking with that particular customer in real time with that feedback. And what you're talking about is something very closely related, specific to interviewing, and I think as it relates to interviewing, it might tell me that you are relaxed or you're stressed or, here's the right answer. But at the end of the day, it has to come from me. Because when I'm sitting in the seat doing the job or in the next interview, and you ask me to, here, go on the whiteboard and draw out your FMA project from last week. There's no AI to help you. You're out there and you have to actually answer it. So I think what it does, though, is it highlights the recruiting process. And I think we need to break that down just a little bit. So if you think about it, the resume, for example, is nothing more than a ticket to the interview. That's all it has to accomplish. And then once you're in the interview, your goal is to get to the next interview. That's it. Neither one of those steps are the job. They are just the stepping stones to the job, or the finite pieces to the job, to be more on point. And then you get to the next interview, and then you get to the offer. And once you get to the offer, then you need to know how to close. And on both sides, both the company and the candidate, because that's arguably the most emotionally tense period is during the offer process. If not done properly, a lot of hires go sideways during the offer process because both parties don't understand fully how to treat it with the level of care that is required to get through that process. And of course, once you start, there's a whole onboarding and indoctrination that happens either well or poorly, which will materially impact both your impact in that role, but also your longevity. So the reason I'm breaking this down this way is I think it's very important to understand that AI is a tool, nothing more. And it can be a tool that's used very effectively, or it can be a tool that's used as a crutch, right? And so if I had an AI that I'm looking at while I'm talking with you, that feels more crutch-like. Whereas if I did my research about you beforehand, and I understand what you're about and where you come from and what you value, now that's meaningful.
Absolutely. So, John, you said most companies, post job ads that aren't working. So what does, what makes a job hard? Or what makes a job ad ineffective? What are they missing?
There are three things. The biggest thing that's often missed, particularly with larger companies, is they have what they call their standard job description. You're a finite element analyst 1. And that's what they call it internally. And so they post that out there. But I have no idea what that means because I don't work with the company. And usually that comes from a group within the company called compensation, where they map roles to pay. And they say, use this generic job description to go fill this role. Well, that's an internally facing description. So that's the first mistake, is the title is and the description is internally focused, and then they try to publish it externally and wonder why they're not getting good applicants. The second mistake that is made pretty consistently in the job descriptions is they fail to realize, and this may be politically incorrect to frame it this way, but the job description is really a love letter. It's really a message to one person. That's all it is. And they fail to understand that this is not an announcement to the world. This is a message to Ezekiel. I just don't know him yet. But I want this description to talk to you at a very personal level. And the third mistake is being too narrow and where they're going to find that person. I mean, realistically, the person that I want to hire may be walking outside my office building right now, but I don't know how to reach them. And just like with math and statistics, there is no one magic place to find the person, and humans are remarkably random when it comes to how information gets passed around and bounced around. So that third piece and how to solve it is to make sure the job, and this is where JobElephant comes in, is distributed in a way that turns it into a micro viral campaign. So even if it's out on LinkedIn or Indeed or something else, you still need to reach out to people directly who aren't looking for work. You have to create something that is inherently attractive to both the right person and the people around that person. And I'll give you an example. I was supporting a chief information officer for a very well-known company in New York. It was a huge budget, $100 million budget for this executive. And when they came to us, they said, well, we're not sure what you're doing will work. And they were going to use an executive retained search firm and pay some ridiculous amount of money for this hire. And we said, why don't you try this? What executive retained search firm is going to yield results in 2 weeks? And this person said, no one, none of them. So we'll try it. All right, we'll try it. So for this chief information officer, we crafted the love letter, and then we released it out across these different channels. The person they hired was found, screened, and introduced to them in 3 days. 3 days. And they looked at us and said, how did you do that? No executive retained search firm on the planet could have done that. And again, this is where technology intersects with human behavior. So this love letter was crafted as a personal message. It was released out into the world. And this person who was hired heard about the job through his neighbor. So it was a personal referral. His neighbor received an agent from one of the job boards. In other words, it tripped an agent, and then that neighbor got this love letter, and the neighbor said, it's not for me, but it's for you, in 3 days. But this highlights this idea that there is no single place, and the use of technology can be really powerful if you know how to deploy it.
All right. So, John, I'd like to know, how you've pioneered AI-driven hiring solutions. So how is AI, actually changing the way organizations find and attract talent? What can artificial intelligence do that humans can't, or humans can't do as efficiently as AI does it? And what should AI never actually do in the hiring process?
If you think of hiring as a funnel, right? And the top of the funnel is where the people are identified, and then they're initially engaged, and they're screened, and then interviews, and ultimately hires, right? It's a funnel. What's happening now is AI is being used very heavily at the very top of the funnel, meaning that candidates are using AI to write resumes and using AI to apply to a whole bunch of jobs very quickly.
Yeah.
So that creates a bottleneck for the company. So what does the company do? The company they used to use offshore resources, maybe in Africa, who knows, to screen the candidates, to screen all this volume of resumes, which was really inefficient because basically you're asking the least trained people that know about your company to try to find your next superstar. It was not a good match. So now they use AI to try to sift through all these AI resumes to figure out which ones are a good fit. Fundamentally, it's not a particularly great use of AI because at the end of the day, if I'm looking through your AI resume, it may or may not be a really good representation of you. That doesn't mean not to use AI for your resume. It just means to make sure that you don't lose the essence of who you are in this overly polished and usually fairly inaccurate resume. So where does AI fit well? So AI can give you signals based on previous hiring, but don't rely too heavily on those signals to take you too far down the interview and hire path. I often joke with people, I think that hiring is a data problem masquerading as an HR problem. So what does that mean? It means that if you think about and I'll come back to your question about where AI is particularly powerful and where it's not. If you think about me coming to work for you, we're trying to find each other. You have the job, I'm the candidate. Us getting to know each other, to meet, is a ridiculously complex equation. And I'll give you a sense of some of the variables. 1, you have to have a job open. 2, it has to be articulated accurately and in a compelling way. 3, it has to go out to distribution channels that ultimately get to me. 4, I have to actually be looking or be open. Otherwise, I'll just ignore it. 5, it has to be geographically aligned if it's physical. 5, I have to have an application process that I'm willing to do. So if you ask me to fill out 100 questions, I probably won't do it. On the other hand, if it's frictionless, now you have to find me within 300 people. I may be the 290th person to apply, so you don't even look at me. 4, we have to talk to each other and be able to navigate the fit process together with well-crafted interview questions and very direct, candid communication. The next one is we have to be able to have a salary match and a start date. That makes this a very complex equation, because if I miss you by a day, we never meet. Does that make sense?
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So where I
John,
think AI is likely to shine is if I'm able to articulate a job in an accurate and compelling way, I shouldn't have to just depend on who applies to my job. AI can be, it's not quite there yet, can be smart enough to say, here are the 5 people who not only can do this job based on the way it's described, but will likely get along well with you and your style as a manager, based on people who you got along well with and people who you did not get along well with. Once that's known, I think we can get to that point.
all right. Really insightful response. So, you said, quote, you said hiring is a data problem masquerading as an HR problem, which I find really interesting. So what role does data play in helping companies reach diverse and qualified candidates?
Okay, so I'll give you an example. This isn't an AI example, but it's a data example. There was a role we were filling for a company called Chemdex a long time ago. And it was taking chemistry data and sharing it amongst a large number of people doing chemical research. David was the CEO. And they were having a really hard time finding people that they wanted to hire. Okay, and they had the long list of requirements and years of experience. They just weren't finding the right people. And this particular person came across my radar. It was someone who wasn't nearly as experienced as they said they wanted, but had something that was very unusual at the time, is they had web development experience and they have a degree in chemistry. That's a weird combination. And so I went to the recruiter and I said, send this person to David. They're like, no, that job's not open. They're looking for something totally different. I said, I understand what you're saying. Send the job to David. And they resisted. And I said, really, you need to send this person to David. And they begrudgingly sent this resume to David. Within an hour, David was on the phone with the candidate and they hired him within 2 days. The recruiter came back to me and said, what did you see that no one else saw? It was the data. It was the fact that someone who's spanned this range of web development and chemistry for a company that's doing chemistry on the web was an obvious thing to me, but was not obvious to the technology or to the recruiter. Another example, and this is where AI is going to struggle. There's a company in Colorado that was hiring for this particular senior role. And they looked at all these people who look like the right people, but they just didn't like any of them. They weren't a good personality fit. Even though all the AI and the data said, no, these people are really good. And again, I saw a candidate. And again, this is where experience needs to meet the technology and the AI. One thing that the executive team of this company in Colorado had in common to a person was they used to be a competitive downhill skier. Had nothing to do with the job, had everything to do with the culture. So we found an executive who had been a competitive downhill skier. And I said, send him this person. Doesn't have the years of experience. Send him the person. They hired him within 2 weeks because it was such a good cultural fit. And again, this highlights another element that I think is going to be very hard for AI to grok, which is oftentimes the person who will fit best isn't the one who has the experience. It's the one who has the motivation, learning capacity, and personality fit. What do I mean by that? I would much rather hire you as a motivated, smart person who has shown that you can learn things quickly and incorporate what you learn than someone who has a bunch of experience and is kind of stuck in their ways. Silicon Valley was built on this. The number of young executives out of Stanford, for example, that get tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars of funding, even though they don't have much experience in it, is like a story that's been told 100 times. Because they like people who keep churning the problem and learn and then adjust and change. That's something that not everyone can do well. But for a company at that stage, that's a much higher value than raw experience. Experience can be learned or can be garnered, and certainly knowledge can be learned, but motivation cannot. So how well will AI determine how motivated you are? And your motivation is also closely related to your interest. You might be highly motivated, but if you're not interested in accounting, it doesn't matter how motivated you are.
All right, John. That again was, a really valuable and insightful response. So how can a company or an hiring manager, how can they measure whether their recruitment advertising is actually working?
Okay, so look at the funnel of clicks, views, interviews, offers, and hires. Be very quantitative about that. That's one of the ways they can find out and gauge if their interviewing and hiring is working well. And this is where JobElephant really shines, because very few systems, certainly no single job board, can track all of that. They'll only know their data. They won't know everyone else's. Applicant tracking systems tend not to know click and view data for every job when it goes out into the world. And so when all that data is lined up, it becomes almost like a paint by numbers problem solving equation. So if I get very few clicks and very few views, but get interviews, that tells me that my description is probably very accurate, but maybe too narrow. If I get 500 clicks and 400 views and no applicants, I know that there's something in the job title that's off. I'm getting people to look at it, but they're not progressing. You see where I'm going with this?
Yep.
And this is antithetical to organizations that make their money by clicks. For example, Indeed, their whole business model is around clicks. Companies go and they pay for clicks. That's what they pay for. And the more money you give them, the more clicks they'll give you. But as a manager and as an HR team, more clicks past a certain threshold isn't helpful, because now I have more noise, and to find the signal or the candidate in that noise gets more difficult. And that's where AI needs to come in and help me determine potentially what people have, not only the hard skills or experience, like we talked about, but in some cases, more importantly, the motivation, the cultural fit, the professional elasticity to be able to say, I'm wrong, I'm going to try something else now. Some people have a really hard time with that. Does that make sense?
Yes, Johnny, it does. So what's two of the things you've been emphasizing on since the start of this conversation? Number one is the job description, and number two, the job title. You talk about how HRs have to make descriptions talk to potential employees on a personal level. So I like us to, make this practical a bit. For example, if you were writing or rewriting the job description for a technical role, let's use the example of a software engineer, what would you do differently than most companies?
Goes back to where we started with the questions to be asked. What needs to get done by when? How will the person's success be quantitatively measured? Why would the right person want this job? And what are the common attributes of your rock stars? So I think when you look at the job description, it really has to hit an emotional level, not just a technical or functional one, right? That's a key piece. Now, one of the things we have at JobElephant that we're happy to share is a job description generator. One of the elements that it incorporates is who is the manager? Because when you think about it, if the job reports to you versus me, same job title, same company, that's actually a slightly different job, because how you manage is different than the way I manage. It's not better or worse, it's just different. You could be really hands-on and really day-to-day with everybody. I might be very hands-off and just say, let's check in once a week on the measurable results. Neither one's good or bad. It's just how we are. You might like people who are early risers. I like people who stay up in the middle of the night and do their work. Doesn't matter, but it speaks to my style and the style that I like and the people on my team. That has to be incorporated. Very few job descriptions get down to that level of detail. Like, maybe you're into, again, going back to the finite element analysis, you like people who break problems into little pieces. That's how you see the world. That's how you found your success. So you like people who do that versus the people who are more generalized and go by gut feel. It's like you appreciate that, but that's not how you prefer your team members to behave, because it's harder to solve the pieces that yield the end result if you can't break it down into these finite pieces that then you can now stress test and change out pieces and see where the ultimate stressors are and where things are red and where they're green and right?
Yep. Fascinating.
So, yeah, and this is a really hard thing for HR people to do, in part because in many companies, the managers don't share this information with the recruiters or the HR department. And this is where the better, or more, better is the wrong word, the more effective HR departments will pull the manager in and say, now we're going to sit in on the interview together, for example. Because I can use the AI tools to tell me which candidates might be best, but it isn't until I sit in on your interviews that I see what's really important to you.
So, John, you've talked about how people use artificial intelligence, to help build and, polish their resumes. And on the other hand, HRs using AI to, help scan through the hundreds of resumes they receive to, select a few that will be, the best fit that they can actually go review and see the possibility of having an interview with it. So I'd like to know, what does the future of talent acquisition look like, as artificial intelligence tools continue to evolve, both on the side of us using AI to polish our resumes and, from the viewpoint of the HRs, using it to help hire better, what's going to change in the next, for example, 5 to 10 years that most people aren't really preparing for?
Well, first, I want to make sure we have a clarification. AI isn't this magical black box. AI is simply the culmination of a lot of human decisions. That's what it is. And it's all about where the little dots line up to the other little dots. That's what AI is. So it isn't this magical thing. It is only as good as the data it's been fed to create the model. And I bring this to your point of focus only because I sometimes think AI is bigger than that. It's not. And if I feed it a bunch of data, like some companies have for their hiring, and then say, okay, let's use this to screen our resumes, and weirdly, AI says all the best people are white males. Well, wait a minute. Let's look at all the data we fed it. It was all white males that we prioritized, or, see what I'm saying?
Yep.
And so that's, you have to look at the data. But I think where we can go, and this is where I think it's exciting. Imagine a world where I am looking for a job, and I'll start with the person who might be looking for a job. And rather than have to sift through brain-numbing job descriptions, I can say, here's my background, here's what I am talented at doing, here's what I'm not talented at doing, in a very genuine, true way. Here's what I'd like to do, here's what I would like not to do, here's where I want to live, here's where I do not want to live. And at any given time, any one of us can say, well, what should I be considering? And based on that, it pulls up 5 people at various companies saying you should probably talk to these 5 people if they're available to talk to you, independent of having a job with them, because you're the kind of person who will fit in on that team and contribute. Now, if they have a little flag that's raised that says, hey, we're hiring, then that's going to be prioritized. But it now completely changes how a job and a person find each other. The other way is now I want to hire someone. Okay, well, here's the functional title, here's the job description in whatever form it is, but the person's going to report to me at this company in this location. And rather than have to post that and get the dishwashers and the people who aren't even close, it's going to say, here are the 20 people who would likely be a good fit with you in this role. Would you like me to go reach out to them to see if they're interested in talking with you? Yes, I would. But it would also protect their anonymity and mine. This is the other thing that's a lot of people don't want to put their resume out there or apply to jobs online for fear that it's going to get in the wrong hands or be, used until the sun goes nova somewhere in some weird, data collection machine. But imagine a world where people who want to work can, and if I say I want to be an astronaut and I don't have what it takes to be an astronaut, the AI is going to say, right now, it doesn't look like you're the kind of person who would be a good fit for these reasons. I haven't been a pilot. I've never flown jets. Just the list of things that my experience does not align with the role that I say I want. That's, I think, where we're heading. I think it completely changes the nature of how people and jobs find each other. There will be one or two interesting byproducts of this if it does, in fact, work out that way. One is that the person who is not a learner, who doesn't want to work hard, who doesn't have a track record of success or continuity, the person who has a new job every 8 to 12 months for the last 10 years, there's not going to be any person that says that you should go talk to unless that person is hiring for a year. Does that make sense? And that's going to be very hard for some people to look in the mirror and say, this is on me, no one else.
Absolutely, John. A really insightful response. So to wrap things up here, for our listeners who actually want to go learn more about JobElephant or, they want to continue this conversation, where is the best place for them to start?
They should definitely go to JobElephant.com and you can call or reach out. I can be reached through the general contact information there. And I'm happy to continue this conversation with anyone who's interested.
John, it has been really valuable time, having you on the show today. And once again, thank you for joining us.
Absolutely my pleasure.